The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? lit. Real, live, lit. Right? The revolution is lit.
Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akilé Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for today. Today's study is themed, Drop the Charges Against the Uhuru 3. On Monday, July 17th, 2023, attorneys for the Uhuru 3 filed a precedent-setting motion to dismiss bogus federal charges, which are part of the U.S. government's ongoing attacks on the African liberation movement, the Black community, anti-colonial movements, and the overall right to freedom of speech and assembly. The motion is part of an historic legal counteroffensive against escalating government assaults on free speech rights, where the state is being used under the cover of law to assail the First Amendment. I'm going to be reading the motion today, and you can read along to it by accessing the document link in the Facebook or YouTube descriptions, or by visiting handsoffuhuru.org/motion-to-dismiss. We'll then be joined by the entire Uhuru 3, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Penny Hess, the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and Jesse Neville, the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, who will deepen our understanding on the significance of this precedent-setting document. Following all of the presentations, we'll take some questions from the audience. Before we start, make sure to share this study far and wide. Take a moment right now to like this video, tag your friends, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and to Chairman Omali's Twitch channel. Also, throughout the study, we'd like for any donations to go to uhurutours.com/donate. Donating to Uhuru Tours today will help to bring the electrifying presentations of Chairman Omali Yeshitela to the Northeast U.S. this fall. Again, that's uhurutours.com/donate. So let's begin our reading. Motion to dismiss indictment. United States of America versus Penny Hess. Defendant Penny Hess by her attorneys Leonard C. Goodman and Angela J. Rainey, pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure and the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, hereby moves this honorable court to dismiss the indictment. In support of this motion, defendant states as follows. The African People's Socialist Party was founded in 1972 by defendant Omali Yeshitela. The party's platform can be found on its website, apspuhuru.org. The APSP supports the rights of African people throughout the world to be free from colonialism, described as a condition of existence where a whole people is oppressively dominated by a foreign and alien state power for the purpose of economic exploitation and political advantage. The APSP believes that all Black people are African people and are a part of a single national entity. It believes that the vast resources of Africa belong to the African people and not to Western colonizers. It also advocates free speech and political association, a guarantee of the right to work for the betterment and emancipation of Black people without fear of political imprisonment and the loss of life, limb, and livelihood. The APSP oversees a broader network of organizations and programs which collectively comprise the overall Uhuru movement. The APSP publishes its own newspaper called The Burning Spear. Its Uhuru House Community Center in St. Petersburg houses a radio station operated by a nonprofit organization affiliated with the broader Uhuru movement. During its half-century of existence, the APSP has consistently championed several issues. First, it seeks reparations, just economic compensation, for the theft of human and material resources from Africa and its people, and for the centuries of genocide, oppression, and enslavement of our people. Second, it opposes US and Western European political, economic, and military interference in the affairs of Africa and African people throughout the world. Third, the APSP and Uhuru movement oversee programs that support the economic development and well-being of African people. This includes 3 centers in the United States, in St. Louis, Missouri, in St. Petersburg, Florida, and in Oakland, California. Through these centers, Uhuru-affiliated organizations operate farmers markets, recreation programs, and training programs for African women to become doulas. The Uhuru movement also operates several businesses, including Uhuru Foods and Pies and Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles. As part of its advocacy on behalf of African peoples, the APSP chairman and other party members regularly travel to foreign countries and participate in conferences. In 1981, the chairman attended the Managua Conference in solidarity with the FSLN government in Nicaragua. In 1983, the chairman went to Belfast, Northern Ireland to speak. In 2002, the chairman was the keynote speaker at the 8th Congress of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania in Umtata, South Africa. In 2004, the chairman spoke at the Global African Conference in Suriname that resolved to demand reparations. In 2006, the chairman traveled to Southern Africa and met with former Namibian President Sam Nujoma. In 2007, the chairman was the keynote speaker at a conference in Huelva, Spain, sponsored by a Spanish NGO. In 2012, the chairman spoke on the legacy of Marcus Garvey in London, Paris, Berlin, Brussels, and Stockholm. In 2015, he also spoke at a conference in Jamaica. In 2019, the chairman traveled to Oxford Union to participate in a debate on African unity. In 2015, APSP chairman made 2 trips to Moscow to attend conferences arranged by Defendant Ianov and his group called the Anti-Globalization Movement of Russia. Contrary to the allegations in the indictment, APSP did not conceal the party's associations with Russia and Russians. Rather, the APSP described its trips to Moscow in the Burning Spear the same way it described its other trips. The superseding indictment. The superseding indictment charges 3 members of the APSP: Omali Yeshitela, the founder and chairman of the APSP; Penny Hess, a leader of a component of the APSP; and Jesse Neville, a member of a component of the APSP, with violations of 18 U.S.C. 951 and with a related conspiracy to violate 18 U.S.C. 951. The indictment alleges that after attending the May 2015 Anti-Globalization Movement Conference in Moscow, the APSP entered into partnership with Defendant Ianov, or with Ianov's group, to publish pro-Russian propaganda, as well as other information designed to cause dissension in the United States and to promote secessionist ideologies. Superseding indictment. According to this indictment, Ianov is a Russian national, and his organization, the AGMR, was funded by the Russian government through government grants. The superseding indictment offers few details about the alleged partnership agreement between APSP and Ianov. Overt Act Number 2 alleges, on or about May 20th, 2015, Defendant Ianov caused an electronic message to be sent to Defendant Hess, stating that the purpose of Defendant Yeshitela's trip to Russia would be to communicate on future cooperation. Later, the indictment states that Ayanov described this partnership with APSP in a January 16, 2021 Russian language report as a bilateral cooperation program. The indictment next refers to a remark by Yeshitela that the APSP had developed a relationship with forces in Russia. The indictment also cites a February 1st, 2016 Facebook messaging conversation in which Yeshitela told Ayanov, however, it must be understood that we entered this relationship with the anti-globalization movement of Russia as allies, not employees. The indictment alleges that following the 2015 trip to Moscow, APSP became a foreign agent of Russia within the United States, requiring the defendants to register with the Attorney General of the United States under 18 U.S.C. 951. The indictment alleges that by failing to register with the Attorney General as Russian agents, the three APSP defendants violated 18 U.S.C. 951, a crime punishable by up to 10 years imprisonment. The indictment describes overt acts allegedly performed by the APSP in furtherance of its partnership agreement with Ayanov. All of these overt acts involve the APSP defendants expressing their views and beliefs through published articles, public speeches, and political activity. In other words, the indictment targets only the advocacy component of APSP's work and not its economic development work or its programs to support its community. The indictment alleges the following overt acts relating to the APSP defendants. 1. In May 2015, APSP chairman traveled to Russia for a meeting. 2. The APSP supported a United Nations petition alleging that the United States had committed genocide against African people. 3. The APSP sought funds and received about $7,000 from defendant Ayanov to support a four-city speaking tour on the issue of reparations during January 2016. 4. The APSP published an article titled Imperialists Ban Russia from 2016 Olympic Games. APSP says, let Russia play. 5. APSP defendant Neville ran for local office in St. Petersburg. 6. In April 2020, APSP chairman spoke at a Dialogue of Nations Zoom conference hosted by Ayanov. 7. In May 2020, the APSP recorded a video message congratulating the residents of the Russia-backed Donetsk People's Republic. 8. In February and March 2022, APSP defendants made speeches expressing opposition to the U.S. involvement in the crisis in Ukraine and in solidarity with people of Russia and their elected government and leadership. 9. APSP defendants allowed defendant Ayanov to deliver a speech at a video conference hosted by the APSP concerning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, stating that Nazis were in power in Ukraine and were killing innocent people, and that Russia had invaded Ukraine only to stop the killing of Russians by the Ukrainian army. And I'm going to go to page 7 to read this footnote towards the bottom, footnote number 18. The indictment does not allege that Neville's decision to run for office or his campaign had anything to do with Russia. The indictment merely alleges that defendant Ayanov paid attention to Neville's campaign and was favorably disposed to it. The indictment alleges that Ayanov sent an email requesting an interview with Neville to talk about Neville's plans to seek local office and offering AGMR's assistance to Neville, including campaign finance. However, the indictment does not allege that Neville or the APSP ever received or accepted any financial contributions from Russians or from any foreign nationals for Neville's campaign for public office. 10. Speaking at a March 2022 press conference hosted by the APSP, defendant Yeshitela stated, "The African People's Socialist Party calls for unity with Russia in its defensive war in Ukraine against the world colonial powers." And he criticized a United States social media company that had placed content restrictions on posts that supported Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 11. An APSP member expressed support for Putin and Russia in a private email. 12. In March 2022, the APSP hosted a video conference concerning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, during which defendant Ayanov stated that anybody who supported Ukraine was also supporting Nazism and white supremacy. Argument. Section 951 is unconstitutional as applied to Ms. Hess and the other APSP defendants. The indictment in this case directly targets political expression, a core First Amendment right. The government here is prosecuting the APSP defendants under 18 U.S.C. 951, a statute that criminalizes unregistered foreign agents operating in the United States. To be an agent of a foreign government, under Section 951, a person must agree to operate subject to foreign direction or control. United States versus Refuting. This is where it's being cited. A person, however, does not become an agent for purposes of 951 simply by acting in accordance with foreign interests. And let's just take a look at this footnote number 20 on the bottom of page 8. This motion to dismiss is filed on behalf of defendant Penny Hess, whom the indictment alleges facilitated communications between Ianov and Yeshitela. However, the arguments set forth in this motion apply equally to all three APSP defendants, and is anticipated that defendants Yeshitela and Neville will file separate motions adopting the arguments set forth in Hess's motion to dismiss. Section 951 is a general intent crime, and knowledge of the notification requirement need not be proven by the government. At least one federal circuit has held that a conviction under Section 951 requires only for the jury to conclude that the defendant took acts of some kind on behalf of a foreign government without first registering as a foreign agent. Although Section 951 has its roots in the Espionage Act of 1917, it has been rarely used by the government. In Refuting, the defendant was prosecuted under Section 951 for entering a secret agreement with the government of Turkey to help foster the criminal prosecution and extradition of Gulen, a Turkish preacher living in Pennsylvania who President Erdogan blamed for an attempted coup, and to lobby Congress for public hearings on Gulen and his activities. Here, the APSP defendants are not charged with helping Russia achieve any particular action item in the United States, such as gaining extradition of a wanted dissident, freeing a prisoner, or obtaining relief from sanctions, nor are they charged with espionage or fraud. Compare United States versus Campa. Defendants charged under Section 951 with committing espionage on behalf of Cuba. And United States versus Dumesi, defendant was charged under Section 951 with acting as a spy for Iraqi intelligence. United States versus Duran, defendant charged under Section 951 with committing bribery and extortion on behalf of the Venezuelan government. This case is about pure political speech and the right to advocate dissenting views. The overt acts charged in the indictment all relate to political speech and peaceable assembly. The APSP defendants are accused of speaking at conferences, peaceable rallies, and a multi-city speaking tour. They are accused of publishing articles in their own newspaper, including an article written by a foreign national. Most of the charged conduct targets their public criticism of official U.S. policy with respect to Russia and Ukraine. The indictment attempts to criminalize speeches in which defendants criticize NATO expansion eastward to Russia's border. The 2014 U.S.-backed coup to remove Ukraine's Russia-friendly president and replace him with the U.S.-EU puppet regime, and U.S. policy to arm Ukraine to the teeth. Defendants are alleged to have committed additional crimes by making speeches blaming the United States for provoking Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Every one of these charged offenses are protected political speech under the First Amendment. Our form of government is built on the premise that every citizen shall have the right to engage in political expression and association. And we're just going to go to the bottom of page 10, footnote 21. For example, Overt Act 68 in the indictment charges defendant Yeshitela with making a speech on February 27, 2022, in which he criticized NATO encroachment 800 miles towards the border of Russia. He also condemned the 2014 CIA coup against the government of Ukraine that refused to come into the EU and refused to unite with the West against Russia. He described Ukraine as a country armed to the teeth by the white colonizers, a place that Russia could not retreat anymore, and as a dagger pointed right at the heart of Russia. This right was enshrined in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. NAACP versus Button, 371. See also Buckley versus Valeo, which the case regarding political expression is at the core of our electoral process and of the First Amendment freedoms. The First Amendment protects vigorous advocacy, certainly of lawful ends, against governmental intrusion. It was fashioned to assure unfettered interchange of ideas for the bringing about of political and social changes desired by the people. None of the targeted speech of the APSP defendants was in itself unlawful or had any tendency to incite imminent lawless action, nor did it contain any obscenity which might fall outside First Amendment protections. See Roth versus United States, which obscene speech and writings are not protected by the constitutional guarantees of freedom of speech and the press. Rather, the indictment here targets only protected speech. In summary, the government here is using Section 951 to prosecute members of an activist group for political speech and activism in opposition to U.S. foreign policy. In so doing, this prosecution strikes at the heart of the First Amendment. The government cannot, consistent with the First Amendment, criminalize or restrict political speech except to prevent grave and immediate danger. Freedoms of speech and of press, of assembly, and of worship are susceptible of restriction only to prevent grave and immediate danger to interests which the state may lawfully protect. See also Collins. Intrusion is supported upon this domain only if grave and impending public danger requires this. Any attempt to restrict political speech must be justified by clear public interest, threatened not doubtfully or remotely, but by clear and present danger. Whatever occasion would restrain orderly discussion and persuasion at appropriate time and place must have clear support in public danger, actual or impending. Only the gravest abuses, endangering paramount interests, give occasion for permissible limitation. It is therefore in our tradition to allow the widest room for discussion, the narrowest range for its restriction, particularly when this right is exercised in conjunction with peaceable assembly. Of course, Americans are not permitted to abuse their First Amendment rights to incite violence and crime. The people, through their legislatures, may protect themselves against that abuse. But the legislative intervention can find constitutional justification only by dealing with the abuse. The rights themselves must not be curtailed. The greater the importance of safeguarding the community from incitements to the overthrow of our institutions by force and violence, the more imperative is the need to preserve inviolate the constitutional rights of free speech, free press, and free assembly in order to maintain the opportunity for free political discussion, to the end that government may be responsive to the will of the people and that changes, if desired, may be obtained by peaceful means. Therein lies the security of the republic, the very foundation of constitutional government. The superseding indictment does not allege any clear and present danger to justify its attempt to criminalize the protected political speech of the APSP defendants. The superseding indictment does not allege that the APSP defendants' writings and political speeches created a grave and immediate danger that might justify their arrest and prosecution. Instead, the indictment is based upon a premise that protected speech can be criminalized if the speaker has a relationship to Russia. This premise is false and must be rejected. Initially, it must be noted that the APSP defendants have a well-documented history of opposing U.S. efforts to interfere in other countries that predates Yeshitela's visit to Moscow by at least 4 decades. Thus, the suggestion in the indictment that the APSP defendants were speaking for Russia when they blamed the United States for provoking Russia into invading Ukraine is plainly untrue on its face. Even a quick perusal of the archives of the APSP newspaper, The Burning Spear, and their published speeches shows example after example of the APSP's opposition to NATO expansion and U.S. interference in Ukraine. In a 1982 Burning Spear article, the APSP described NATO as a Western military alliance designed to dominate the colonized peoples of the world. In 2011, the APSP opposed the U.S.-led NATO war on Libya, which it described as an attempt to recolonize the continent by imposing U.S. military outposts throughout Africa. Related Burning Spear articles criticized then-President Obama for his betrayal of Africa. In April 2014, more than a year before the APSP chairman's trip to Moscow, it published an article in the Burning Spear called Ukraine, Russia, EU, US, and the Crisis of Imperialism. This article criticized US interference in Ukraine and US involvement in a coup that overthrew democratically elected President Viktor Yanukovych and installed a US-EU puppet regime. It is certain that the Ukrainian coup leaders, conspirators, were funded by the US. US government operatives were in control of the demonstrations and left no room for compromise until their mission was accomplished: the immediate overthrow of Yanukovych's government and the reinstallation of a US-EU puppet regime. This is a quote from the Burning Spear. In this article, the APSP sides with Russia in its struggle to prevent Ukraine from becoming aligned with NATO and the West. It supports Russia's actions in taking back Crimea and recognizing it as part of Russia. It describes in great detail and with derision NATO's expansion eastward since the collapse of the Soviet Union at the expense of Russia's national pride, influence, security, and economic interests. The APSP's opposition to U.S. involvement in the coup that overthrew Ukraine's democratically elected president in 2014 is consistent with the party's longstanding opposition to U.S. involvement in coups and regime change operations in all parts of the world, dating back at least to 1953, when the CIA helped overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh of Iran and install their puppet. This is a footnote. Footnote number 26 on page 15 says a 2012 Burning Spear article summarizes APSP's political opposition to all U.S.-backed regime change operations. Well, we see how the international capitalist class reacts when an election does not go their way and threatens their profits. They revert back to the barrels of guns. Mohammad Mossadegh was duly elected by the people of Iran, but overthrown in 1953 by a U.S. CIA-led coup that put their puppet Shah Reza Pahlavi in power. The Shah committed horrendous crimes against humanity as he stole the people's wealth until the 1979 Iranian Revolution forced him from power. Patrice Lumumba was duly elected as the first prime minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1960, only to be kidnapped and murdered by CIA-led mercenaries in the service of U.S. and Western imperialism, also to be replaced by U.S. puppets. Kwame Nkrumah, the first democratically elected president of Ghana, was overthrown by U.S. CIA coup d'etat in 1966. In 1973, a U.S. orchestrated coup murdered and overthrew the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende, installing U.S. puppet Augusto Pinochet in Chile. Jean-Bertrand Aristide was elected by approximately 70% of Africans voting in the 1991 Haitian elections, only to be kidnapped by U.S. agents that forced into exile in South Africa to be replaced by U.S. puppets. U.S.-backed forces attempted to overthrow the democratically elected Hugo Chavez presidency of Venezuela in 2002. In 2009, a U.S.-backed coup ousted Manuel Zelaya, the duly elected president of Honduras. Countless attempts have been made on the life of Comrade Fidel Castro by U.S. agents. So it is clear, even on the face of the this footnote, continues to the bottom of page 16. So I'll jump back to the top of page 16 after this. So we're talking about Fidel Castro, opposed to Cuban freedom. Imperialism has imposed a blockade on Cuba, attempting to starve the people into submission, although the government in Cuba is duly elected by the people in Cuba. And what about the imperialist-led 1987 assassinations of Comrade President Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, the land of stand-up men, and the most recent hunting down and lynching of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi? Both these men were deposed because they attempted to redistribute the wealth of their respective territories. So back up to the top of page 16. It is clear, even on the face of the indictment, that it was APSP's alignment on issues related to Russia and Ukraine that was the reason for its invitation to the AGMR conference in Moscow in 2015, and the basis of its alleged cooperation agreement with INOV and the AGMR. The indictment does not allege that the APSP defendants ever agreed to advocate any position that did not align with their ideology. In fact, at the April 20th, 2020 Dialogue of Nations conference hosted by INOV and charged in the superseding indictment as Overt Act 56, INOV asked the APSP to unite with a California separatist group called Yes California. But at the conference, recorded on video, APSP defendants Yeshitela and Neville publicly denounced Yes California as a racist group and demanded that INOV remove the group from future conversations. This video shows definitively that the APSP defendants were not under direction and control of INOV and thus were not his agents. But even if it could be shown that the APSP defendants were somehow influenced by Russia in their criticism of U.S. policy, their speech would still be protected. The question, if the rights of free speech and peaceable assembly are to be preserved, is not as to the relations of the speakers, but whether their utterances transcend the bounds of the freedom of speech which the Constitution protects. Here, there is no allegation in the indictment that defendants' utterances transcend the bounds of free speech protections. Instead, the government seeks to criminalize lawful political speech based on relations of the speakers. Such a prosecution is prohibited under the First Amendment. In Dijon, the defendant was convicted under an Oregon criminal syndicalism statute for assisting in the conduct of a public meeting, otherwise lawful, held under the auspices of the Communist Party. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The Supreme Court reversed, holding that the Oregon statute, as applied to the defendant, violated the rights of free speech and peaceable assembly encompassed by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Peaceable assembly for lawful discussion cannot be made a crime. The holding of meetings for peaceable political action cannot be prescribed. Those who assist in the conduct of such meetings cannot be branded as criminals on that score. The question, if the rights of free speech and peaceful assembly are to be preserved, is not as to the auspices under which the meeting is held, but as to its purpose, not as to the relations of the speakers, but whether their utterances transcend the bounds of freedom of speech which the Constitution protects. If the persons assembling have committed crimes elsewhere, if they have formed or are engaged in a conspiracy against the public peace and order, they may be prosecuted for their conspiracy or other violation of valid laws. But it is a different matter when the state, instead of prosecuting them for such offenses, seizes upon mere participation in a peaceable assembly and a lawful public discussion as the basis for a criminal charge. As in De Jong, the defendant's participation in a peaceable assembly and a lawful public discussion cannot be the basis for a criminal charge. The speaker's relationship to the Communist Party in De Jong or to Russia, as alleged in the case at bar, cannot justify the government's using criminal prosecution to suppress political speech. Nor does the allegation in the superseding indictment that the APSP defendants were spreading Russian propaganda and disinformation justify criminal prosecution or suppression of political speech. The government cannot remove constitutional protection from political speech by labeling it propaganda and disinformation. In NAACP versus Button, Virginia attempted to obstruct the NAACP's political strategy of using litigation to eliminate racial barriers by criminalizing the solicitation of any legal or professional business. The NAACP sued to restrain enforcement of this Virginia law under the First Amendment. In response, the state argued that solicitation is wholly outside the area of freedoms protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court disagreed. To this connection, there are two answers. The first is that a state cannot foreclose the exercise of constitutional rights by mere labels. The second is that abstract discussion is not the only species of communication which the Constitution protects. The First Amendment also protects vigorous advocacy, certainly of lawful ends, against governmental intrusion. For the NAACP, litigation is a form of political expression. The government does not have a monopoly on determining what is true and what is false. And as the Supreme Court has repeatedly held, a healthy democracy depends on the unfettered interchange of ideas for the bringing about of political and social changes desired by the people. See also Herndon versus Lowry. Peaceful agitation for a change of our form of government is within the guaranteed liberty of speech. Bridges versus California. It is a prized American privilege to speak one's mind, although not always with perfect good taste, on all public institutions. Courts help to protect these democratic values in part by strictly scrutinizing certain categories of laws that threaten to drive certain ideas or viewpoints from the marketplace. As the Supreme Court stated in Roth versus United States, the fundamental freedoms of speech and press have contributed greatly to the development and well-being of our free society and are indispensable to its continued growth. Ceaseless vigilance is the watchword to prevent their erosion by Congress or by the states. The door barring federal and state intrusion into this area cannot be left ajar. It must be kept tightly closed and opened only the slightest crack necessary to prevent encroachment upon more important interests. In WVA State Board of Education versus Barnett, the court struck down a state rule requiring public school students to salute the flag. There, the court noted that struggles to coerce uniformity of sentiment in support of some end thought essential to their time and country have been waged by many good as well as by evil men. The ultimate futility of such attempts to compel coherence is the lesson of every such effort. Those who begin coercive elimination of dissent soon find themselves exterminating dissenters. Compulsory unification of opinion achieves only the unanimity of the graveyard. The fact that the APSP defendants are accused of opposing official government policy on an important matter of war and peace does not justify an exception to the rule. As the court said in Barnett, freedom to defer is not limited to things that do not matter much. That would be a mere shadow of freedom. The test of its substance is the right to defer as to things that touch the heart of the existing order. If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. If there are any circumstances which permit an exception, they do not occur to us. Moreover, the views of these defendants that the government calls propaganda and disinformation are nearly identical to the views held by well-renowned public intellectuals, such as Professors Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University and John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago. In May 2023, Professor Sachs wrote a column for Common Dreams called "The War in Ukraine Was Provoked and Why That Matters to Achieve Peace." Herein, Sachs argues that the U.S. provoked Russia's invasion first by its intention to expand NATO to Ukraine and Georgia in order to surround Russia in the Black Sea region by NATO countries. And second, by helping to install a Russophobic regime in Ukraine by the violent overthrow of Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, in February 2014. In March 2022, Professor Mearsheimer wrote a column for The Economist called "John Mearsheimer on Why the West is Principally Responsible for the Ukrainian Crisis," in which he argued that the West, and especially America, is principally responsible for the crisis in Ukraine, which began in February 2014. Professor Sachs was an advisor to 3 United Nations Secretaries General and is the author of several books on foreign policy and economics. Professor Mearsheimer is the author of numerous books on security issues and international politics. No one has suggested that the published opinions of Professor Sachs and Mearsheimer are not protected speech. Further, even if it could be objectively proven that the APSP were wrong in their opinions about the war in Ukraine, their speech would still be protected. An erroneous statement is inevitable in free debate, and it must be protected if the freedoms of expression are to have the breathing space that they need to survive. Even a false statement may be deemed to make a valuable contribution to public debate, since it brings about the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error. Finally, the allegation in the indictment that the APSP received trivial sums from IANOV to support their speaking tours and their public advocacy is immaterial. In New York Times Co. versus Sullivan, the newspaper was sued by a public official for a paid advertisement containing a defamatory falsehood relating to his official conduct. The court held that if the allegedly libelous statements would otherwise be constitutionally protected from the present judgment, they do not forfeit that protection because they were published in the form of a paid advertisement. The court explained that the Times was paid for publishing the advertisement is as immaterial in this connection as is the fact that newspapers and books are sold. Any other collusion would discourage newspapers from carrying editorial advertisements of this type, and so might shut off an important outlet for the promulgation of information and ideas by persons who do not themselves have access to publishing facilities, who wish to exercise their freedom of speech, even though they are not members of the press. The effect would be to shackle the First Amendment in its attempt to secure the widest possible dissemination of information from diverse and antagonistic resources. A requirement of registration in order to make a political speech is incompatible with the First Amendment. The fact that Section 951 contains a registration requirement to avoid criminal prosecution does not save this indictment. A requirement that one must register before he undertakes to make a public speech to enlist support for a lawful movement is quite incompatible with the requirements of the First Amendment. No one may be required to obtain a license in order to speak. In Thomas, the defendant was imprisoned under a Texas statute for failing to register as a labor union organizer prior to addressing a scheduled mass meeting held to publicly proclaim the advantages of workers' organization and to persuade workmen to join local number 1002 as part of a campaign for members. The Supreme Court reversed on grounds that the rights of assembly and discussion are protected by the First Amendment. The Thomas Court found that the requirement of registration was in itself an invalid restriction. As a matter of principle, a requirement of registration in order to make a public speech would seem generally incompatible with an exercise of the rights of free speech and free assembly. Lawful public assemblies involving no element of grave and immediate danger to an interest the state is entitled to protect are not instruments of harm which require previous identification of the speakers. If the exercise of the rights of free speech and free assembly cannot be made a crime, we do not think this can be accomplished by the device of requiring previous registration as a condition for exercising them and making such a condition the foundation for restraining in advance their exercise and for imposing a penalty for violating such a restraining order. Similarly, in the case at bar, to the extent that Section 951 required the APSP defendants to notify the Attorney General before making the speeches and publishing the articles charged in the indictment, the statute violates the First Amendment and must either be struck down or limited in scope. This case would appear to be the first time in which a Section 951 prosecution has been challenged on First Amendment grounds, quite likely because it is the first case in which the government has used Section 951 to directly target political speech. In United States versus Dumessi, the government prosecuted a publisher of an Arabic language newspaper under Section 951. But there, the defendant was alleged to be acting as a secret operative of Iraqi intelligence, helping Iraq learn the identity and whereabouts of opposition members living in the United States. Mr. Dumessi was convicted by a jury. On appeal, he challenged the adequacy of the following jury instruction relating to his publishing activities. The First Amendment to the Constitution protects the right to free speech and the freedom of the press. This means that individuals are permitted to express views that are controversial or even despicable. The speech that Mr. Dumessi gave at the Iraqi mission and newspaper articles he authored or published are protected by the First Amendment. The speech and newspaper articles, as well as Mr. Dumessi's opinion and political views, are to be considered only insofar as they may pertain to issues of motive and intent. The Seventh Circuit held that the above instruction met the defendant's concern that his First Amendment protected speech would be used as the basis for a guilty verdict. The defendant in Dumessi also appealed the denial of his motion to suppress the fruits of all surveillance conducted under the FISA, alleging that the facts presented to the FISC, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, in support of the application for surveillance consisted solely of his First Amendment protected activities as a journalist. In reviewing this claim, the Seventh Circuit noted that the FISA statute contains the following restrictions relating to First Amendment activities. Before authorizing electronic or physical surveillance, the FISC must find probable cause to believe that the target of the electronic surveillance is a foreign power or an agent of a foreign power, provided that no United States person may be considered a foreign power or an agent of a foreign power solely upon the basis of activities protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. The Dumessi court reviewed the materials relied upon by the FISC and concluded that the government provided probable cause that Dumessi was an agent of a foreign power entirely independent of any of his journalistic activities. Thus, in the FISA statute, Congress made sure that the government could not obtain a probable cause warrant to surveil a person suspected of being an agent of a foreign power based on protected speech. A similar limitation must be imposed on Section 951 to assure that this statute can never be used again to criminalize speech protected by the First Amendment. The superseding indictment must be dismissed as to Ms. Hess and the other APSP defendants to avoid the chilling effect upon the exercise of First Amendment rights that may derive from the fact of this prosecution. A criminal prosecution under a statute with an overbroad sweep that can be used indiscriminately by prosecutors to target protected speech usually involves imponderables and contingencies that themselves may inhibit the full exercise of First Amendment freedoms. Dismissal of the indictment as to Ms. Hess and the other APSP defendants is necessary, not only to protect the First Amendment rights of these defendants, but also to protect the rights of other Americans whose speech may be inhibited if this prosecution is permitted to go forward. As the court stated in Dobrowski versus Feister, because of the sensitive nature of constitutionally protected expression, we have not required that all of those subject to overbroad regulations risk prosecution to test their rights. For free expression of transcendent value to all society, and not merely to those exercising their rights, might be the loser. So important are these values of free expression that the Supreme Court has allowed attacks on overly broad statutes with no requirement that the person making the attack demonstrate that his own conduct cannot be regulated by a statute drawn with the requisite narrow specificity. Lord, you guys get the word. We have fashioned this exception to the usual rules governing standing because of the danger of tolerating, in the area of First Amendment freedoms, the existence of a penal statute susceptible of sweeping and improper application. The chilling effect upon the exercise of First Amendment rights may derive from the fact of the prosecution, unaffected by the prospects of its success or failure. Here, no exception to any rules governing standing is necessary. The APSP defendants are being criminally prosecuted under Section 951 for their dissenting speech. They have standing to challenge the constitutionality of the statute. The existence of a statute like 951 that can be used by federal officials to target dissenting speech is itself a threat to free expression. In Thornhill versus Alabama, the Supreme Court struck down an Alabama statute that criminalized picketing a place of business to publicize facts of a labor dispute. There, the court held the existence of such a statute, which readily lends itself to harsh and discriminatory enforcement by local prosecuting officials against particular groups deemed to merit their displeasure, results in a continuous and pervasive restraint on all freedom of discussion that might reasonably be regarded as within its purview. In the case at bar, the government is using Section 951 in a discriminatory manner to target a particular group that merits its displeasure. It has been widely reported that more than a dozen prominent Washington research groups, aka think tanks, have received tens of millions of dollars from foreign governments in recent years while pushing United States government officials to adopt policies that often reflect the donors' priorities. None of these prominent DC think tanks that receive millions of dollars from foreign governments are ever prosecuted under Section 951 as unregistered foreign agents. Yet, members of the APSP, a small group of Black activists who allegedly received about $7,000 to support speaking tours, are prosecuted under Section 951 for their disfavored speech. For all these reasons, dismissal of the superseding indictment is required as to the APSP defendants. Wherefore, based on the foregoing, Defendant Penny has respectfully moved this honorable court to enter an order dismissing the superseding indictment in the above captioned case with prejudice. Respectfully submitted, Leonard Goodman. So this, again, is the motion of dismissal that was filed on July 17th of this year. And to further expound on this, I would like to welcome up the Uhuru 3, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the leader and founder of the African People's Socialist Party, Penny Hess, the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and Jesse Neville, the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Uhuru, comrades.
Thank you, Comrade Director Akilé, for hosting this meeting, this study, as per usual, and also for enduring that whole process of reading this legal stuff. I want to, first of all, welcome everybody for participating in this meeting. And while with you recognizing that the brief that has just been read, that you have access to as a part of the study, clearly destroys the bogus charges that have been imposed on us. It clearly destroys all of the arguments alleged of the criminality of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, and those immediately characterized as the Uhuru 3, includes me, comrades Penny Hess and Jesse Neville. So the brief does that. I think everybody who has heard that and all of you who have access to it can read it, recognize that to be the case. And I want to also say that there has never been any doubt on the part of our movement and me and the people who have been charged. There's never been any doubt that we have whether we have committed a crime or not, even as defined by the United States government. But the fact is that the United States government has never thought that we've done this either. Right. So I want that to be something that must be clearly understood. There's never been any doubt in our mind. There's never been any doubt in the mind of the US government, which is one of the reasons that after several months of having stolen virtually every communique between members of our organization and me and the others who have been characterized as the Uhuru 3, after months of having poured through all of that, then the United States government offers a $10 million reward, a bounty, for any information that could prove that we have done this. And one would have to ask the question, why would they have to do that after they have all of our materials? What information could somebody else have that they don't have? just off of the stolen materials that they have. And if you listen to this brief, you see that we are an extraordinarily transparent organization. One of the things that I think make us effective is the fact that we write it all, we print it all, we publish it all, because we think that it's absolutely necessary that the people are informed of everything that we do, what we believe, so the people themselves can achieve the benefit of the leadership of the advanced attachment of the African working class and the African nation. So we've never hidden anything we've done. And I think this is really important for you to understand. The brief shows that. The brief goes to statements that we've made, how we've defined this relationship with the United States government. We've never hidden that. So the brief shows that. But what the brief does not speak to exactly, but is that while we are transparent, the government is not. The FBI is not. And you cannot judge an event just by how it represents itself at any given moment. You need to know something about the history of the process that brought it to this place. If you know something about the history, what you will find is that since the inception of the African People's Socialist Party, almost at least since 1977, we have advocated freedom of assembly, free speech, freedom of association, freedom for the right to express our views without being killed, freedom of Black people and oppressed and exploited people all around the world, freedom to have those kinds of relations. We've always done that. That's not new. But the fact is that the government has always attacked us for these things and for this advocacy. We are now in court because of something that they claim happened in the 2000s, but since our founding, we have had to face these kinds of attacks because of what we said. I can't tell you the numbers of times I have been arrested, jailed for what I've said, for free speech. And so you can track this history. You can see what we've always done, how we've always been transparent. And then you can look at the federal government. You can see it's always target Black freedom. It always targeted Marcus Garvey, targeted W.E.B. Du Bois, targeted all kinds of forces, including popular singers and things like Aretha Franklin, etc. So this should be something that all of us recognize in looking at this, because I talked to a reporter not too long ago inadvertently, and this guy is talking to me. He wants to have a discussion as if history just started, that there is no tradition of killing, looting, of having kidnapped African people, have made us so-called citizens at gunpoint. They're like, there's no history of that. So we're going to have a discussion that somehow, if you recognize that all this stuff happened, that Africa was raped of my presence and continues to be raped of my presence and resources, that Black people have been forced to labor for white power for this economy, for what is now the major corporations in this country as well, that we've been forced to do this. And that with the pleasure of the government, we've been starved to guarantee that we do it, because if you don't, you starve. We've been imprisoned, and even as we have this discussion, one of the things that the United States is concerned about is it in this contest that it has engaged in with Russia and China for an understanding or perception of the world, which has the best system. One of the problems they've had is that the United States government is killing Black people on a daily basis in the streets of this country. And sometimes not just the government, sometimes white people, and sometimes white people marching down the streets with torches at night, looking like images of Ku Klux Klaners past, or the United States government past, for that matter. And so all of this is happening at the same time. The United States government, in this contest with China and Russia, and others, especially colonized people, have now, the United States government has now declared that it represents the good of the world, the good of democracy versus the evil of autocracy. And so as they're making these claims, they've got the largest prison population in the world. I don't know if that's autocratic or not. It seems to me that sounds rather autocratic, especially when you look at the fact that at least more than 50% of that includes Africans and other colonized people. So how do you, this is something that's at play now. This huge discussion internationally and also inside this country. The fact is that nobody in this country goes without being seen by the government, being heard by the government. They have cameras on every block, every place you live, in your computers, in your cell phones. They have listening devices and satellites and what have you. Major invasions in your computers by the government. And we've just read that 248,000 of those were illegal according to their standards. These are the kinds of contradictions that the United States government is confronted with. And it's in this contest with the rest of the world as being this great democracy versus the autocracies. And so this is something that gives urgency to the attack on the African People's Social Party, because we're not saying anything different. We just keep saying and keep saying and keep saying. The only thing's changed some of the circumstances within which this discussion is being held. In the 1960s, when we said it, they didn't like it either. They locked us up. They put me in prison. They handcuffed me in the backseat police car. They clubbed me. They've done all those things. They locked up and killed people. They, killed Malcolm and all those other people. In the 1960s, they didn't like it either. But at one point in the 1960s, it became necessary for them to disguise what it is that they were doing to us, because the world recognized at that time that America was characterized more than anything else by images of Black people just trying to register to join Joe Biden's party, images of churches being bombed and African women being widowed as a consequence of her husbands, or the children being killed by the government or by white people. That's what was seen by all the world. But there was a China that was pointing at this. There was a Russia that was pointing at this and saying, see, this is what your capitalism provides. And so it became necessary for them to try and obscure some of that. And here we are in the African People's Socialist Party, relentlessly criticizing what this government is doing to Black people, what the whole colonial mode of production is doing to Africans and other oppressed peoples around the world. It's within this context also that it becomes necessary to attack us. So I think the brief is brilliant. I think the United States government never thought that we committed any offense. We knew we never committed any criminal offense, legal offense. But we also know that we live in a world, as Black people in particular and other colonized people, that you have always had to be extraordinarily careful about what you said, that the government would lock you up, your bosses would fire you. You couldn't even wear your hair a certain way and be certain that you're going to have your job. You're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of expression is something that Black people have always had to be concerned about. And we're not going to enter into this discussion like our reporter friend wanted us to, like the Supreme Court of the Justice Department would want us to, act like there's no history to this process. There's a history to this relationship. We didn't volunteer for it. We were put into it by gunpoint. And then finally, I want to say, saying all of this, we look at this brief, brilliant brief, but we also recognize that it's colonial law. We did not volunteer. That's why we have to be careful of what we say, because the colonizer controls the courtrooms. The colonizer controls the police. The colonizer controls the jobs. You can't go to a job with certain views. The colonizer does, like all of these things. And that's just the abject reality, that we've had to live with forever. So this assumption of free speech we've recognized has never existed for us. And this is because of the colonizer controls not only the law is defined by the interests of the colonizers, which is one of the reasons slavery would be legal. If you remember, during the era of slavery, it was legal. And when people like Nat Turner tried to break out of slavery, they jailed him. They put him on trial for breaking the law. This is a similar situation. I'm being put on trial for breaking a law that challenges a law that's based on the colonial control and domination and starvation, impoverishment, humiliation of Black people. They say, I broke that law. That's the charge against me. It's a colonial law. And so you can't say anything about it. If you say something about it, you can be jailed. So that's a colonial law. It's the colonial state apparatus, the police, that comes to jail us. It's the police who makes a decision when you're walking across the street and she sees you walking across the street. If you didn't go to the corner to do that, whether or not you're going to be charged with jaywalking or not. That's a decision that somebody makes. The law is there for everybody, but they decide whether or not you're going to go to jail or whether the white person down the street's going to go to jail. They enforce the law. They enforce the law. They say after the fact, they could say Mike Brown in 2014 was walking in the streets and the police didn't want to see him walk in the streets. And so therefore Mike Brown ends up dead. That's the law. But who enforces the law? How many it's a colonial law, it's colonial enforcement. So how many instances do you hear of white people being shot in the top of the head for walking in the middle of the street? That's all they did in their own communities, walking across the street. Jaywalking has never caused that kind of problem in white communities, generally speaking. So it's colonial law, colonial enforcement, and we're going before a colonial court. And so the law is brilliant, but that's not the determining factor of whether or not how we will prevail. That will determine that we will prevail. It's you. It's the people. The trial has already begun. And this brief, the court system can do what the hell it wants to. We can't say what the court's going to do here. But what we can do is reveal this to you. You see how ridiculous the charges are. You see how they've been destroyed. I don't know anything about procedures of evidence and what would be permitted by a judge. But even according to their law, the judge is not the final force that will make the determination. It's the jury. It's the people, a so-called group of people who are my peers. And increasingly every day we see the development of consciousness that move my peers to be certainly African people who suffer the same consequences, live in the same communities, and face the same police in a relationship that might seem mysterious to white people who do not live here. This is also a peerage that's beginning to develop in certain other ways in terms of the belief systems, in terms of the fact that people no longer believe. Many people have turned their backs in terms of the belief system. They're just looking for something else to believe in. The United States government is spared that we've provided that for them, but the peerage of the people who can hear this. And this is one of the things that makes this brief so brilliant. Look at the brief. It doesn't just cite law, it cites what we believe, what we've always believed, why we are being attacked, and why you on the right side, if you unite with this brief, and if you unite with this brief, then you become the primary factor that will determine what happens, whether we will go to trial and be jailed in prison after February, or whether the court will be forced to do what it has to do by the peoples, by Africans, by those of other colonized people, by those of you who say you believe in justice, freedom, and free speech. The masses will make the determination. The people will decide what the court will decide. So this court has already begun as far as we're concerned, and the people are the jury. And we are speaking to you, bringing you this evidence so that you can go ahead and act on this evidence and fight to say hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa, and drop the charges against the Uhuru 3, and also all power to the people and black power to the African nation. All right. Okay.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru, yes. Well, I really want to just appreciate that breakdown. And, it's something that you said, from the beginning, that we cannot purely rely on, being able to win, in the court, that this is a movement that has to sweep the ground. And that's what the Hands Off Uhuru counteroffensive, has been in the process of. So it's this whole process that's moving us into this direction. And as you said, the trial has been, we've been started. As soon as they attacked this movement on July 29th, we were, in the process of putting the system on trial. And just really want to appreciate the brilliance of this document, as you've mentioned. And we've discussed that in some ways that it's comparable to Fidel Castro's History Will Absolve Me. But in many ways, the document itself is unmatched. And it's truly historic, and it asserts the agency and the will of African people while serving as an indictment of the U.S. government. And I know comrades Penny Hess and Jesse Neville are there with you. and just want to see if you comrades want to join and jump into this discussion. And I know especially Comrade Jesse, you played a really important role even in the preparing of this motion to dismiss. So would like to just formally welcome you both to the program. Uhuru.
Can you see? Who am I looking at? Up here. Up here. No, but I mean, who am I looking at on the screen? Who's going to be moving now? Jesse, Penny? Okay.
Uhuru, Chairman, just really want to salute your leadership and say what an honor it is to be part of this process, this incredibly historical process that is going on right now. And I do, just want to say that just like everything that Chairman Omali Yeshitela does, the whole process of laying out the case that we see here and how it's going to be defended and won has been a political strategy. It has been political education that the chairman has taken on, just as we know that there's nothing that the chairman does or the party does that is not a political, just doesn't have a political context and strategy connected to it. So I think that it's very powerful that is evident. I also think that it's, just a number of things that are important in it. One of them is that it shows that Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the party are the target of this, even though this is filed in the name of Penny Hess, and it makes it really clear that Jesse and myself are, quote, adjunct under the leadership of the party. And it establishes the case that they're making, that the Attorney Goodman is making here is the case of the African People's Socialist Party and Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And I think that's really, really important to show. Because it has been really important that the solidarity movement existed behind enemy lines in the white community during the whole raids and this entire political attack on the right of African people to organize for the liberation of Africa and African people everywhere. And, we saw, I know the Hands Off Uhuru showed a film the other night about the trial of Huey Newton in 1968, in which the state expected to give him the death penalty on that, but that was completely overturned ultimately. And as the chairman has said, it was a perfect example of a trial waged among the people. The struggle, on the streets for the African Revolution was really critical and shows in that. And that is what this is, and the whole, this is totally connected to the Hands Off Uhuru coalition, Fight Back coalition, and the whole work that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has done to put the state on trial since the very day, July 29th, 2023, when the chairman immediately held a press conference, fighting back and taking this on. And I do think that just one other point that I want to make is that one of the sort of founding conditions or understandings of the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back coalition is the understanding that it is the African liberation movement and the anti-colonial movements that are under attack and must be in the leadership of this whole struggle and the fight to push back the state, and has really won that. And the understanding, I think one of the uniting principles of it are, of the coalition is free Omali Yeshitela and we free the world. We lay the basis for all attacks on freedom of speech to be wiped out. And I think that this incredible brief is precedent setting, and that it does show, it reflects that. It reflects the leadership of the African liberation movement in terms of this whole, fighting the colonial law, which opens up the ability, just as in the 1950s with the struggle of African people overturned the McCarthy era, as the chairman has pointed out. This opens up the basis for that. Everything that's going under the attack on the free speech, the weaponization of the U.S. government that is going on in Congress right now. I think that this is incredibly precedent setting and changes the basis of political trials and bringing it to the colonial question for the first time. So I just really want to salute the chairman, your incredible leadership, Jesse's profound work in doing the research of the party's history, and also Attorney Leonard Goodman for really working to put all of this together in a very, very incredibly significant and precedent-setting document. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Uhuru Penny, thank you so much for your contributions. Want to unite with, just what it is that you stated about the significance of this document, and also the significance of, really joining in this fight back, demanding the charges be dropped against the Uhuru 3 and against Chairman Omali Yeshitela, recognizing really the implications that it has, not just for people inside the U.S., but for struggles emerging and rolling throughout the world. That it's really, really important to just back this campaign 100% and to demand the charges be dropped against the Uhuru 3 and Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And just before we go to our announcement section and our Q&A, I want to turn it over to Comrade Jesse, who, as mentioned, played a really important role in the construction of this document by way of lots of research. And want to just welcome you, Comrade Jesse, and see if you have any remarks for us.
Uhuru Director Akilé, and Uhuru Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and Chairwoman Penny Hess, and everybody. It's an honor to be on this episode of Omali Taught Me to discuss this historic and precedent-setting and powerful motion for dismissal. And I just want to start off by deeply saluting the work that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has been doing to prepare this motion for the last 50 years, since 1972. Because what makes the motion so powerful is that it does reflect 50 years of history of the African People's Socialist Party in raising these questions, in raising the question of reparations, in condemning U.S. wars of imperialist aggression around the world and against oppressed peoples inside this country, in demanding reparations to African people. It's all there, and it's all there in the Burning Spear archives. So I really want to salute the party and that history and the profound and rich revolutionary chronicle of the party's history that is found in the Burning Spear archives. And I also want to salute Leonard Goodman, Attorney Leonard Goodman, and all of the attorneys on the legal team of the Uhuru 3, including Mutaki Akbar and Addie Griffin, and say that their presence and this motion itself is, as was mentioned, is a product of the people's movement that has emerged under the leadership of the Hands Off Uhuru campaign, under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, that has pushed all of these questions to the surface. And I just want to unite with the chairman's statement that we don't know what's going to happen with this motion in terms of the court system, but the significance of studying it, publicizing it, and arming the masses with the understandings contained in it, because that's what will be the ultimate determining factor in how this whole thing turns out. And I just really want to express unity with that. And also the point that you made, Chairman, that the U.S. government knows that you and the Uhuru movement did not commit these crimes, quote unquote, that they've laid out in this bogus indictment. They know that. It's not like they're going to read this indictment and go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that this stuff was covered by the First Amendment. They know that. And that's why the document is so powerful, is because it exposes so thoroughly that there's no legal basis whatsoever for what the U.S. government has done and is doing to the chairman and the African People's Socialist Party. So like the chairman said over almost a year ago, if there's no legal basis, if they know that the party did not do what they said it's doing, then why did they raid the Uhuru movement?
Exactly.
Why are they indicting Chairman Omali Yeshitela? Why are they making this attack? That's what this document, it begs that question. And it exposes this attack as something where the US government is using the legal process as a shell for raw colonial state repression of the African People's Socialist Party and the right of African people to freedom of speech to criticize their colonial conditions and to advocate for liberation from those colonial conditions. And that's what I love about the motion, because it starts off, it's so moving the way it begins. I mean, I don't know, you might expect that it would start off with something about when the founding fathers drafted the Bill of Rights. No, it talks about the real Bill of Rights, the 14-point platform of the African People's Socialist Party, and the position of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the philosophy of the Uhuru movement, what the party is, who the party is, what it believes, and the fact that Africans are one people fighting for liberation from colonialism. It defines colonialism. And then it even says that within that platform is the belief in free speech and political association. So that's what the party believes in. And that's what the US government says they believe in. So this really forces them to say, do you actually believe in this? So it's a powerful document, and not to go through the entire thing, but I think that it's.
May I?
Yes, Chairman.
On that particular point, I
Yes.
think it's important that this is why we put, what we want, what we believe in every issue of the Running Spear newspaper. This is why we do everything we can to win the members of the African People's Socialist Party to unity, to understanding these views, and to take it out to the broader public. Why we have these studies every Sunday, because the question is the belief in free speech. We say that that's part of our program. And right away, when we get attacked like this, that everybody in our movement, associated with our movement, you don't even have to get any word from anybody else. This is what we believe in. We say we believe in the right to be able to do this without fear of loss of life, liberty, and the rest of that. We say that right there. And that means that all of us believe that in our party, in our movement, all of our friends and forces who unite with us, believe in that. So that automatically says that you got to get in motion. You got to struggle, and it says also, finally, is that the critical question for the struggle for freedom of all the peoples on the planet Earth is consolidating this colonial issue.
Yes.
Because they can forever, like in the United States, you have peace movement, you have anti-war movement, you have movement around all kinds of issues. But the foundation, the belief foundation, the constitutional legal system, everything rests upon the assault on colonized people. You wouldn't be having a Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. if they hadn't stolen the land of the indigenous people, and if they hadn't got an African to build it. Africans to build the capital of Washington, D.C. I mean, this is just, and so you have the Supreme Court there, you have the Capitol, you have all these rules and regulations, but they sit on top of mounds of murdered indigenous peoples here and Africans, et cetera. And I just think it's really, really important for all that calls itself a left. You can't get to anything until you go through this colonial question. If you really believe in free speech, you have to be prepared to move when they say they killed a black boy because he said he was not a white woman. Right. That's the most ridiculous kind of thing in the world. So the free speech in every question of democracy, freedom, liberation is concentrated right in the question of colonized people. The whole legal system reflects that globally, not just inside the United States. I just want to say that. I think it's important that these leftists and people who they get behind this movement, this is the movement that will defend and make free speech possible. Just like when they were talking about fascism in this country in the 1950s, Fannie Lou Hamer and all those poor black people who were hit with water hoses and things like that throughout the South and who died. That's the thing that kept the society open, if you will. There was no fascism here. It was not anti-fascist movement that did that. It was an anti-colonial movement that did that. That was poor black people, throughout this country. That's the thing that I'm hoping that this we can come to understand too through examination of this brief and the discussion around this brief. Uhuru, Jesse, I'm not going to interrupt you anymore.
Yeah. Oh, no, thank you. Please do. I was just going to, if we still wanted to, I could just give a brief
Please,
overview or summary of the document itself. So, this document, I just want to say it's worth rereading. It's worth studying. It articulates so much, really the message that the Hands Off Uhuru campaign has been winning in the world for a year now in a powerful way. And just to kind of go through what's contained in this document, so as we mentioned, it begins with the introduction, and there's no way to introduce this motion for dismissal that makes more sense than to introduce it with who the African People's Socialist Party is, what its platform is, the definition of colonialism, that the party is uniting Africans as one people to be free from colonialism and demanding reparations, that it calls for free speech and political association, and that it has a consistent 5 decades long track record of advocating for reparations to African people and opposing US and Western military and other kinds of interference in the lives of African and other oppressed peoples. And it also includes a brief description of the party's programs, which is really important. It talks about the work that the party is actually doing on the ground to build political and economic power in the hands of the African working class. And it talks about the way that the chairman has traveled throughout the world to advocate for these issues and to build this movement over decades of the party's history and all of the different places where the chairman has gone, including significantly Northern Ireland during the so-called Troubles, Oxford Union, Nicaragua, and other places. And then it includes a summary of the indictment, which is important to include probably for a legal formality that in a motion for dismissal you have to include a description of the indictment. But it's also, I think, helpful in building the argument to run through all of the overt acts in the indictment, because it reinforces the fact that every single one of those so-called overt acts is supposed to be protected by the First Amendment, that it was all political expression and assembly and organizing and speaking and petitioning and running for office. These are the overt acts of this alleged criminal conspiracy that's in the indictment. Then it goes into the most compelling section, which is the argument. And it talks about, so it makes several points. One, that the indictment directly targets political expression, and that Section 951 is rooted in the Espionage Act of 1917, which kind of caught my ear actually, because of course 1917 is also the year of the Russian Revolution. So that seems like it might be worth researching that. But that every single other case where the US government has used Section 951 to prosecute someone, and this is not to say that those were legitimate cases or not, but the fact is, in every other case, there was something in addition to political speech that they were charging the person with. They were either charging them with spying or bribery or corruption or fraud or doing something on behalf of a foreign government that involved some other kind of charge. The point this motion makes is that this is actually the first time in the history of this law that the US government is using it to target Chairman Omali Yeshitela, to target somebody where it's entirely based on political speech. There's nothing else there. It's all 100% political speech that's the basis for the indictment. And then the other thing that it does is it brilliantly anticipates any counter argument that they might make about the First Amendment, because they might say, oh, well, there's certain things that are not protected by the First Amendment. For example, obscenity. Well, they didn't accuse anyone in this case of obscenity. Well, inciting lawless action, or that's not applicable here either. Well, presenting a clear and grave danger, also not applicable. So it goes through everything and just knocks them down one by one to further show that this has no basis in the law. And then it makes the point that even it gives the broader history of the party in terms of the party's position on US wars and NATO and everything. But then it even goes specifically on Ukraine and Russia and shows that there is documented evidence of the chairman and the party's position on NATO, Ukraine, Russia, and that whole situation that predates any contact with the anti-globalization movement of Russia, and that obviously no Russian influence was necessary for Chairman Omali Yeshitela to take the positions that he has taken on that question. I love the part where it quotes from the Burning Spear about all of the coups and regime change operations that the party has opposed, going back to the coup in Iran, the CIA-backed coup in Iran in 1953, and all the way up to Burkina Faso and then to Libya with Gaddafi. But then it makes the point again, even if there was evidence of Russian influence in taking that position, which there isn't, but even if there was, it would still still supposed to be protected by the First Amendment. And in each case, it does that. It says what the truth is, but then it says even if what you're saying is true, there's still no basis for this indictment to go through. And then I really appreciated the part where it said the government does not have a monopoly on what is true and what is false, and that you can't make something criminal by calling it propaganda and disinformation. And that when you start to do that, basically, and this speaks to the point that Chairwoman Penny was just referencing, that the anti-colonial free speech question is at the heart of the free speech question in general. If African people's right to free speech is taken away or is openly nullified, then free speech itself ceases to have any meaning. And it makes that point by saying, once you start eliminating dissent, you're one step away from eliminating the dissenters. And that takes you to a situation where everybody agrees because you're in a graveyard and you have the unanimity of the graveyard. I thought that was a really powerful point as well. And then it goes through to talk about every aspect of the indictment, the bogus stuff about funds that were received by the party and how nonsensical that is. But again, it makes the point, even if it's true, it still doesn't change the fact that nothing the party has been charged with doing constitutes a crime according to their law. And then it makes the point about, well, because what actually is the chairman and the room have been charged with making all of these presentations, with running people for office, with petitioning the United Nations without having first registered as an agent with the Attorney General, which obviously there would be no reason to do that. But nonetheless, the motion makes the point that it is unconstitutional according to US law to require somebody to register with a government agency before they make a speech. That's not how the First Amendment is supposed to work. So all of these are points that it makes, and it references all of these other cases to make this point. And then it concludes by saying that were this prosecution not to be thrown out, it would have a chilling effect on free speech in this country. And then it ends by highlighting the blatant hypocritical selective prosecution, which is also a point the chairman has been making about this for a long time, that they have these big Washington think tanks. It doesn't name AIPAC specifically, but you can fill in the blanks, and there's many others that get millions and millions of dollars from foreign governments to lobby, Congress people on their behalf, and they are never charged. And we're talking big Washington think tanks that get tens of millions of dollars, never get charged with anything. And here's the African People's Socialist Party being charged with 951 under this bogus indictment. So it's a powerful document, and as you've said, Chairman, it drops the whole free speech thing right in their laps, and it does it in a really powerful way.
Uhuru. Good.
Uhuru, Chairman, Uhuru, Comrades Penny and Jesse. Wow, very profound. Thank you, Jesse, for this overview of the document. And I want to unite and join and say it does deserve, another 2-3 readings, on the part of everyone attending this meeting. And you can do that. The motion to dismiss is available at handsoffuhuru.org/motion to dismiss. And this will not be the last time that we discuss this brilliant document, of course. And really just want to appreciate what's been stated about what this document does. It really is a weapon, and it also gives them no room to run. Nothing. They cannot avoid the verdict coming from the people, in terms of, what this system is doing, what it has historically done, and all the moves that they're engaged in now to cover up, this history, to cover up the origins of this entire world that we know that exists today, that dominates, the lives of majority of peoples on the planet. All of that is coming to the surface, and they won't be able to erase that. And I'm reminded by a move, I think, Chairman, that you mentioned. It might have been the French who had several years ago put inside the curriculum how slavery and colonialism had been good for Africans. They're doing that same thing again, in Florida right now. That's happening right now, where history is being distorted, but they cannot be successful, because they will not be successful in crushing this movement, in attempting to lock up the Uhuru 3. The people have spoken, the charges will be dropped, and we are winning. So, Uhuru.
Yeah. I know we're moving. I just want to make a couple of points. One specifically to something that was mentioned in the indictment against us. And it was referenced in what we've just gone through in terms of the brief, and that is that the claim is that we took money of, I think they said $7,000 or so from Ionov, who founded the anti-globalization movement of Russia, that they say is funded by grant from the Russian government. And that's the thing. It's funded by a grant from the United States government, by the Russian government, I should say, the Russian government. But the reason the United States came to my brain is because we operate a farmer's market.
Right.
That's funded by a grant from the U.S. government. And we don't work for the United States government.
Right.
I don't know what Ionov's relationship is to the Russian government. I'm learning from this brief that it was funded by a grant from the Russian government. But I'm just saying, if that is the case, and I don't believe anything that they've said in their attack against us and the charges against us, because I know that everything they said about us is a lie. So, but I'm just saying that it's not the same thing. You can't even construe that as being the same thing as saying that it was a Russian agent because he ran this thing, with a grant from the Russian government. I think it's also, like much of the brief that we've just discussed, and there's much, much more that could have gone there, is stuff that Comrade Jesse worked with to extract from the archives, from the African People's Socialist Party, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Same archives that the FBI raided, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But they could have gone there without raiding them and got the same information, couldn't they?
Yes.
If they were interested in that. I just think that it's a really important. It's the University of South Florida, Florida, right? University of Florida. That's why digitize all the archives, and they are digitizing the archives, but the burning spears already happened. So I think that's important for us to say. And the issue around Ukraine and Russia, because our position around Ukraine predates this 1914 coup. The coup is important. We mentioned it's true, and factually. But the thing is, when you look at this espionage act, that's the basis for this charge that they're making against us, was done in 1917. The year before the United States invaded Russia, to try to crush that revolution, and clearly something that's influenced by what? The Russian Revolution. Right. So here we're being charged, within a law that was created to attack Russia in 1917 as a part of a law created to prevent any support for Russia in 1917. And we are charged under that law with the claim that we are winning support for Russia. And I'm just saying that the charge itself has its origin in the attack against Russia. And if nothing else, it's a statement of prejudice on the part of the state, the government, and attacking us right now. I just think that history is there, and it's something worth mention. Not to say that any of this would get to court, to other courts, but you are the court. So it's one of the reasons I wanted to say that. So, comment, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, I just wanted to say on that, and I really appreciate this whole discussion and just the laying out of the case that Comrade Jesse just did. And, I think that the colonial question is being brought to court. It's really, like we saw, talking about the film we saw the other night, tens of thousands, millions of people were on the streets, but the political and understanding of African internationalism and the colonial mode of production is now through you and through the party. And so this is a deeper level than what was brought to the court then. And it is precedent. I mean, it's opening up the whole colonial question inside the borders of the United States and around the world, I think. And that is its precedent value in so many ways. And it's really powerful. And just that I saw that there's a film coming out called The Lakota Nation versus the US government. And I haven't seen it, but I did see the trailer. And the thing that they're saying is this is colonialism and we're fighting for power. And that has never, that comes from African internationalism. It comes from the African People's Socialist Party. And it's just going to open the floodgates of this colonial question, which, that they've given us this opportunity because, like you said, they know they violated freedom of speech. They know that this is the most basic things that are being put out in this. And anyway, I just think that it is an incredible period, like you're saying, and I unite with all the fight back and all the work that we have to keep doing and to politicize and publicize this brilliant brief and the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Uhuru. So we are going to move to our announcements and then to questions from our live audience. But I also just wanted to mention with regard to precedent setting, I think also what people will be able to see and experience from this is and will gain the courage to actually fight back and to not, be stuck in trapped in those situations of feeling like you can't push them back, to feel like they can't, you can't dispute these charges, these bogus charges, trumped up charges that come against people, that we're also inspiring, forces to be able to push back against these types of attacks that the state makes. It's making every day on all sorts of people. And we know people who are under, similar types of, what's characterized as state repression today. And we just, I think, are able, we will see, with this movement, what it is that we're doing, a lot more people willing to push back against the state. So just wanted to say that. But we will now go into our announcements to take a look at everything we're doing in the Uhuru movement. And to kick us off with this, actually wanted to bring up Comrade Akilé Anai, who's the chief of staff for the office of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and we'll be talking about how you can help participate in bringing the presentations of Chairman Omali Yeshitela to the Northeast U.S. this fall, promoting his new book, The Verdict is In, Reparations Now, which is just fresh off the press, and we will talk to you all a little bit later today in terms of how you can access that book. But Comrade Akilé is here, and we'll let you know how you can support the Northeast U.S. tour with the chairman this fall. So, Comrade Akilé, welcome.
Uhuru, and I want to salute my leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and just say that this has been just, really precedent setting. And I'm glad that everyone is tuned in today. I'm going to make this short and sweet because I recognize that people have lots of questions, but I want to appreciate everyone that has donated today, which is Comrade Leah, Sarah, Raya, Lisa, and Imwazi. We have raised $125 today. We have $75 left to go. And if people can see, people see? The book is here. The verdict is in, reparations now. If you haven't gotten your copy, please go to the Burning Spear website and order your copy today. This powerful book includes most of the brilliant testimonies from the first tribunal on reparations to African people held in Brooklyn, New York in 1982, led by the African People's Socialist Party and Chairman Omali Yeshitela as the people's advocate. The tribunal put the U.S. government on trial for genocide of African people and ruled that African people were owed $4.1 trillion in reparations in the U.S. alone. The chairman used the Genocide Convention of the United Nations as the legal basis for the tribunal and exposed again in 1982 that the colonial conditions of African people met every one of the UN's 5 qualifications for the crime of genocide. It was during this time that the chairman determined that the party would make reparations a household word, which indeed it has become. And as you've heard, Uhuru Tours is ready to launch this very important book tour, and it will be going to Philadelphia, Newark, New Jersey, and New York in September. And we're using Each Omali Taught Me as an opportunity to help us raise resources for the tour. To date, we have raised $1,436.19, and I really want to appreciate everyone that has supported again. Again, to donate to help us reach our goal today, which is $200 for each Omali Taught Me, please go to www.uhurutours.com/donate. And you can also request the tour come to your area. So please, please, please go to www.uhurutours.com/donate and make your contribution today. Uhuru.
Uhuru Ikinge. And now we'll go to our other announcements. So first, join the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party and the African liberation struggle. Drop the charges against the Uhuru 3. Donate or volunteer to the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Defense Campaign today. And for more information, you can go to handsoffuhuru.org to sign up to volunteer, donate, sign our petition, the emergency response pledge, and much, much more. Again, that's handsoffuhuru.org. Every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Africa time, tune in live for the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa, Africa region broadcast. This week's program will feature Comrade Aganze Shiababo to discuss the impact of instability in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the global prices of cobalt and coltan as we continue to wage the counteroffensive against the FBI attacks on Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru movement. And you can go to facebook.com/APSP Africa region. That's facebook.com/APSP Africa region to catch that live broadcast. Join the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Defense Campaign on Saturday, July 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central for a web event 1 year later, pushing back the FBI attacks on the Uhuru movement. Join us for an overview of the past year, solidarity statements from our supporters, making the demand to drop the charges against the Uhuru 3, coalition building, and mobilizing for the Black is Back's 15th annual March on the White House on November 4th. You can register at tinyurl.com/HOU July 29. That's tinyurl.com/HOU July 29 or handsoffuhuru.org/events. Midwest region, come to St. Louis's One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market, a program of the Black Power Blueprint to end food apartheid and build economic development in North St. Louis. The market runs from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in their new, beautiful location, the historic O'Fallon Park, on the first Saturday of every month. The remaining market dates are August 5th, September 2nd, and then a special Halloween festival on October 28th. For more information, visit oneafricamarket.com. On August 19th and 20th in St. Louis, Missouri, come to the 14th Annual National Conference of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace and Reparations. The title of the conference is Not One Step Backwards, FBI Attacks on the Black Liberation Movement Again. Drop the charges now. More information and registration is available at blackisbackcoalition.org. And as mentioned, announcing the new book, The Verdict is in, Reparations Now. It's the 40th anniversary edition of the report from the 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations to African People, including a foreword by Loezi Kinshasa, additional testimonies, and an epilogue by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. You can pre-order at the Burning Spear store to have your copy signed by the chairman, and today is the last day to pre-order for a signed copy. Last day. So you can still get a signed copy later, but you will have to get it at one of the chairman's tour events this fall. So for that guaranteed signatured copy, you have to order today at the burningspear.store. So go right now to the burningspear.store. And make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. And Comrade King just mentioned, Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for the chairman and other party speakers and leaders. You can book the chairman and other Uhuru movement speakers for your campus or your organization now. Go to uhurutours.com, email at info@uhurutours.com, or call 727-914-3621. And for more events that have not been mentioned here, please visit theburningspear.com/events to see everything happening within the Uhuru movement. So that's going to conclude our announcements. We have just a little time for some questions to our panel. And so we're going to get into that now. I want to acknowledge where people are watching from. We have the UK, St. Louis, Missouri, Oakland, California, South Africa, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, West Michigan, San Francisco, California, Huntsville, Alabama, Namibia, Zambia, Lexington, Kentucky, West Virginia, Silver Spring, Maryland, Pipestone, Minnesota, Montreal, Canada, Lakeland, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, Grenada, West Indies, Gainesville, Florida, Bermuda, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Boston, Massachusetts, Sierra Leone, Richmond, Virginia, and Largo, Florida, all tuned in with us today. So Uhuru, comrades, thank you for tuning in everywhere you are located in the world. And this first question comes from Comrade Mandisi in Boston. It says, Uhuru, comrades, in conversations with the Uhuru 3's attorneys, has there been any conversation about the possibility that other Uhuru movement members can file a lawsuit or a notice of intent to sue? A notice of intent to sue based around the civil rights violations and violations around freedom of speech. So Uhuru, that didn't have a specific.
Yes.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's something we should discuss.
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea because it inferred so much about everybody else.
Right.
One thing, when they attack us like that, they attacked us for the belief, and everybody who's part of this believes the same thing. So I think that's a great idea. We're gonna look into that, Comrade Mandisi.
Great.
Uhuru. All right, so let me see. There's a comrade from There's a comment from Comrade DL Sendero, which I believe is Paul on YouTube. Asks, "Do we know when the court will hear this motion?" That's something we can answer now.
Uhuru. So the court. So the motion has been filed with the court on behalf of Chairwoman Penny, and actually, as of Friday morning, it was adopted by the chairman's attorney as well. And then the same will happen for me on Monday morning. And then what we've been told is that the prosecutors have until August 8th to respond to the motion, which presumably would be them responding with why they think it should not be dismissed. Although, as Chair Mwezi said in the chat, we should expect the unexpected. But nonetheless, if it goes that way, at that point, the judge would have 30 days to either rule on the motion, meaning grant it or deny it, or call for a hearing where oral arguments would be presented from each side on why the motion should either be granted or denied. So that's where it's at in the court process right now.
Uhuru, thank you, Jesse, for clarifying that for us. And we also want to just remind forces that on July 29th, this coming July 29th, the Hands Off Uhuru event, there will also be, further updates around these questions, around these legal proceeding questions and things like that. So make sure you register for the July 29th one-year anniversary event. So we have a question in St. Louis from, looks like Deputy Chair Omali Yeshitela. So Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman and Jesse and Chairwoman Penny. I just want on that same line, I would like to know would each defendant you would have a different judge who would have to actually, dismiss it, or would it be one combination of one judge that could, that's in charge of dismissing it if it comes down to that?
Well, the political motion, brief, this one immediately was for Penny Hess. We have a group defense. So there are 3 lawyers that are working together. And so one of the lawyers that took this on, and for Penny, with the understanding that it's something that would be adopted, and the brief itself says so. The likelihood that this would be applicable to all the defendants. And then, so on August 8th, by August 8th, the prosecution has to either say, I believe with the thousands of people out in the streets and doing other kinds of things, that the charges should be dropped, or I have to eat crow, which is hard to do, and say, I agree that the charges should be dropped. And so at that time, the judge, this judge, right?
Yeah.
Which judge?
The one who is hearing the brief.
Yeah.
Will make a decision of whether or not, which way it should go, whether oral arguments can be heard about this thing. And then trial dates would be set immediately. I guess what we're talking about I guess back to the question is whether that would be all 3 of us going before a single judge at this time.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
We need to find out.
Yeah.
Because, as individuals, you are, charged as individuals, and we have 3 different lawyers. So the question was like, will we have 3 different judges for this brief?
That's a good question.
Good question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you to Deputy Chair Omali Yeshitela for that question. And we've got about 5 minutes left. So I just want to acknowledge this final comment, and then we'll just close with our panelists, taking some closing remarks from our panelists. But this comment comes from username JG on YouTube, who said, I would like to get the Lakota Nation involved with this movement as an ally. So I know this comrade is being responded to in the chat, but I just wanted to acknowledge this comrade for everyone on the live. So Uhuru, thank you, Comrade JG. And without further ado, I want to just turn it over for closing remarks from our panelists, and we can go with Jesse, then Penny, and then the chairman.
Uhuru. Well, I'll just close by saying thank you so much to you, Director Akilé, and to the chairman for this important discussion today. And the party is winning. The party will win. Long live African People's Socialist Party. Hands off for Uhuru. Drop the charges against the Uhuru 3.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. Yes, I just really want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the making of history. It is very exciting to see the world changing and to see your leadership in that, and to see the vision of the future that everybody can live in under the leadership of the African working class. And I do just really want to make one more plug for July 29th event. Go to tinyurl.com/HOU July 29. tinyurl.com/HOU July 29th. Go and register. This is going to be very powerful. 1 year later, stronger than ever. And the party is winning. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chairman. Uhuru.
Thank you. I want to express appreciation to Comrades Penny and Jesse, and to you, Comrade Director, for hosting and presiding over this process, and all of the people who've come on to this discussion. And I would add only that recognizing the power of this brief, which is really an articulation of history more than anything else, general history and history specific to our party and movement. Just the power of that should not allow any of us to become complacent. It is a powerful document. It's going to be extremely important for us to take it before the people. That, in the final analysis, is going to make the determination. Always has. And so this is a call to share this. And in your different committees and organizations, if you're part of the movement, you got to study this, look at it. And it provides you with every argument that you might need for prying insidious people who call themselves reporters, but who are actually instruments in most instances, certainly in many instances, of the state's attempt to entrap us and, to use something we said against us. So get it out in the world and build your committees. Join the hands of Uhuru.org. Come on to the anti-colonial free speech movement that is growing and involving so many more organizations and people than have ever been involved in this fashion in my history of being alive, where for the first time we see the so-called white left, the white peace movement, the white anti-war movement working and coalescing under the leadership of this extraordinarily continuously emerging to public view anti-colonial struggle. It's now, for the first time in history, we are making a major assault against the colonial mode of production itself. History is being made, and we have an opportunity to be conscious parts of that history. So you've got to support this organization, this coalition that's being built. You got to make contributions to this, because I got to get out in the world and talk to people more and more, just in terms of building our case and defense for our case. I want to thank you all and everybody who played a role in producing this installment of the study. Uhuru kicked the ass of the ruling class. All power to the people. Black power to the African nation. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru, Chairman. And with that, I just want to unite with the call for everybody to study this document, to get it out into the world, to understand it, to articulate it. And, this is going to just deliver, is already in the process of delivering a huge blow to the whole U.S. government and, this social system built on the foundation of slavery, genocide, the oppression and exploitation of the peoples around the world. Very exciting. And I was just very honored to be able to present that here. This document is obviously influenced by the brilliant leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the theory of African internationalism. That's why it's a document unto itself, its own thing. And, so just very, very powerful, very important study. I also want to shout out and salute our incredible lawyers for the Hands Off Uhuru legal defense as well. And just thank also all of the members of the Omali Taught Me Show team to help pull this whole process together, and all of you for watching. Make sure you follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Hands off Uhuru, hands off
Africa.
Drop the charges against the Uhuru 3. Uhuru.